Okay, so this is Sabbath sermon for this Sabbath. I don't know what the date is today. It's July, I don't know, July something. All right. 15? 13. July 13. Okay. So we're going to continue with the eschatology theme, and I want to start out with, I guess, the first text that I selected this morning was Revelation chapter 1, um, and the first paragraph. So, Valerie, why don't you read that so we can get started here? Okay, we're using 3 different translations here this morning.
Mine is the ESV.
Yep, ESV.
Verses 1 through 3.
3, yeah.
The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants the things that must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near.
Okay, so there are several themes in this paragraph that I want to branch out from. And the first thing I want to point out here is that we have in prophetic scripture, and we have something called parallelism. And the book of Revelation is written in a more prophetic style than, say, the evangelists or that Paul writes. They write in different styles. But the parallel style, you'll see it in Psalms, and the idea is that the same thought will be expressed in different words in adjoined clauses of the text. So this helps you get the context and interpret when the same idea is being repeated like 3 different ways. Then you get the idea of what is being said, and it helps you give a fuller understanding of the point that's being made. Okay, so there's a 3-way parallelism going on in verses 1 and 2 here. Okay, so I want you to notice it. Okay, these glasses are actually a faulty pair of my myriad of glasses. I don't think I can bend that back into shape. You want to grab me a pair of glasses that isn't so bent? That's probably all right, yeah. You dust them off.
This is going to be a major.
Okay, I dust them off. So, if you read the book of, the similar ideas will be repeated, often just separated by commas, but when you realize that the text is just repeating the same thing in different words, then it helps you, if you don't understand how it's said in one clause, and the next clause will help you understand it, or the whole going together. So, so in the first clause of Revelation 1 here, the revelation of Yeshua the Anointed, which the Almighty gave him to show his servants things that must quickly happen. Okay, so there's 2 themes here that you can notice that are parallel. And the first one is I want you to notice the mention of Yeshua and the mention of the Almighty here. So this is the mention of the Father, or of the Son and the Father. Okay. Get my glasses on, that's much better, yes. Okay. So, and then we have this which quickly must happen. So the first idea in parallel here is Yeshua and the Almighty, or Yeshua and the Almighty gave him a revelation. Okay, so in the next clause it says, and he put it into signs, having sent it through his messenger. Okay, so he here corresponds to the Almighty, to the Father. Okay, and his messenger corresponds to Yeshua. Okay, so that's the parallelism here. Okay, and the background we have in Scripture for this is the messenger the messenger of Yahweh, or the Malach Yahweh, the representation or representative of, of the Lord, okay, who turns out to be a physical appearance of the Lord in human or angelic form. Okay, so when he wrestled with Jacob, Jacob said, he called the place Peniel, which means face of God, okay, and I have seen God face to face, Pene, El Pene, okay, and we have that where he appeared to Samson's parents, and Samson's father asked him what they could do for him, and could they sacrifice a goat, and he told them how to do it. And then he went up in the flames of the sacrifice, actually receiving the sacrifice and letting them worship him. Okay, so it's quite clear that the messenger is identified as the Lord himself. All right, so we see that being keyed into Revelation here.
In
Okay.
my text, it says his servant John, which
Okay, go ahead, read your text.
the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place, he made it known by sending his angel to his servant John.
Oh, yes, okay, that is at the end of the verse. And he put it in signs, having sent it through his messenger to his servant Yochanan. So Yochanan is the destination of the message. Okay, but the one transmitting the message is the messenger. Okay.
That's the angel.
Right, the angel, the messenger. Okay, and that stands parallel to Yeshua. Okay, and he put it in signs. He gave it in signs, and sent it. So God the Father gave the signs to Yeshua, the messenger, and Yeshua, the messenger, gave it to John. Okay, so that's the transmission here. Okay, so the verse finishes in verse 2. We have the third parallelism, or the third instance. John, who witnessed the word of the Almighty. So who refers to John here? Okay, Almighty the Father and the testimony of Yeshua the Anointed, as much as he saw. Okay, so they showed it. The Father revealed it to Yeshua, Yeshua revealed it to John. Okay, and if we know later in Revelation, it comes through the scroll with the 7 seals that no one was worthy to break, except the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So only Yeshua was allowed to break the seals of the scrolls and to look inside of it and reveal it. So we have that unfolding. Okay, so now the other element of parallelism I want you to notice here is that in verse 1, to show his servants what must quickly happen. Okay, so we have that, it quickly happen. And then if you look down in verse 3, you see as the time is near, or the appointed season is near. Okay, and this is what I want to get into here more, is the appointed season and what that is, and also the other theme here we're going to look at is blessed is the one reading and those listening to the words of the prophecy and keeping the things having been written in it. Okay, so what does it mean to listen and keep things written in the prophecy? All right, so I talked to some about this some last Sabbath. The way as we get rescued is not by some political means, but by obeying God, and we have to obey Him to get Him to rescue us. Okay, so this is sort of related to the same theme. Okay, so the water did that to me. Just give me a second here. I've changed to a falsetto. Okay, so the season is near. Okay, so John is using the biblical holidays here as a launching pad for to talk about eschatological seasons. Okay, so I'm convinced that this book was delivered by his 7 messengers to the assemblies in Asia Minor about the time of the fall feast, or just prior to the fall feast. Okay, so this is considered the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, or day of purging, day of purification, and the Feast of Tabernacles. So the first day of Tabernacles, and then the 7-day feast, and then the last great day on the 8th day, which is Shemini Etzeret, which means the 8th day assembly. Okay. So when he talks about the appointed time is near, he's speaking cryptically both of eschatological seasons, but he's also speaking of observing God's laws and keeping His holy days. Okay. So we're meeting on the Sabbath today because we're sanctifying the Sabbath and we're keeping it holy and we're setting it apart to pursue the things of God and to keep it holy by resting and relaxing and doing the things that God told us to do. All right, so the eschatology is connected to the observance of God's law because it is by the observance of God's law that we show our love for Him, and that if it says in Exodus 20, verse 6, it says in the Ten Commandments, it says, showing loving kindness to those who loving Him and keeping His commandments to a thousand generations. Okay, so that verse shows us that there's a relationship between obeying God and Him, as Yeshua said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. But He also gives us promises for keeping His commandments. Okay, so to give you a little compare here, to give you a little contrast, I like to listen to Amar Tsafardi, not because he's correct, but because he's such a stellar example of incorrectness that maybe he should be held up. And he's an Israeli dispensationalist, and he lives in Israel, but he does a lot of preaching to English. In fact, all of his preaching is in English, as far as I know, and he does preaching to American audiences as well. And he's preaching the pre-trib rapture, and he's always preaching prophecy all the time. But if you notice that when he's doing his videos, he never mentions God's law or makes a connection. And now, his title of one of his latest videos was The Appointed Time, okay? And he equivocates the appointed time with the rapture and other minor appointed times, but he manages never to mention the Sabbath or the Feast of Trumpets or Tabernacles or Passover or Pentecost as appointed times. He never mentions it. And of course, in the dispensational worldview, the Sabbath is for the Jews. Okay, so the Jews are separate from the church, and the church is separated from the Jews, and never the twain shall meet. Okay, so this probably explains why this theme is totally missing from his preaching. The word moed in Hebrew means appointed time. Okay, so if you say appointed time in English, most people who are conversant with God's law would know that he was talking about his holy days to use that phrase. Okay, so we need, when it talks about appointed season here, this is a word that would be used to translate moed in the Greek. It's a word that we translate in Hebrew moed. Okay, so there would be a connection. Okay, and John can say it's near in one sense and near and not near in another sense. So it's near in a seasonal sense, but it's not near in an ultimate eschatological sense. Okay, so now I want to turn to Habakkuk here and draw some connections between Habakkuk chapter 2 and this passage in Revelation here, and some really interesting connections you might think. So let's see. I translated it out of Hebrew in my notes here. Okay, so sometimes when I'm preparing something, I'll translate it directly from the Hebrew because there's enough problems with the text to warrant it, or I just want to make sure that I've got it right. Okay, so Habakkuk 2:3 here. Okay, so if you want to look that up, you can follow along in your translation here. So Habakkuk, of course, is concerning Babylon and its judgment, and how Israel and Judah was carried into captivity to Babylon. Okay, and Habakkuk is wondering when God will judge Babylon and when he will restore the kingdom. And so this is part of God's answer to Habakkuk. Okay, verse 3, because onward is the vision at the appointed time, and it must breathe at the end. Okay, so I translated the Hebrew literally, and it must breathe at the end, which means the spirit of the vision that fulfills it, um, or God's spirit will fulfill it at the end. Okay, so breathe is a metaphorical word being used here to fulfill, or it must be fulfilled at the end, completed, or it must happen at the end. But the Hebrew word is the word for breathe. And it must breathe at the end, so it does not make being lied. Okay, so Habakkuk was questioning God because he wasn't bringing Babylon into judgment like he thought it would happen. And the assurance is given here that the spirit of the vision will be carried out and fulfilled in its completion against Babylon, and in the sense that it breathes at the end, so that it does not make being lied. Now that's a assiduously literal translation, so it's not a lie. It's an emphatic Hebrew PAL sense. Okay. All right. So the next clause, if it makes being delayed. Okay. So this is a contingency because, of course, Habakkuk was seeing that the vision was being delayed. If it makes being delayed, make being waited for it. So this is also two emphatic uses of the PAL here. So if it's not coming to pass right away, then it will. Then you need to persevere and wait for it longer. Okay, because coming it will come. Okay, I think that's ki yavo ta yavo. I think that's right. Let's just remember the Hebrew there. So that's the use of a verb compound for more emphasis. Because coming it will come, or it will surely come. Okay. It will not make being tardied. Now, the word tardy, I'm sure you are familiar with. If you went to public school, you know what tardy means. Tardy is a black mark you get when you're late to class. Okay, and you get so many tardies, then you get penalized for it in some way. But tardy means to be too late or overly late when you're supposed to be on time, to be later than you should be. Okay. So the Hebrew word is different than if it makes being delayed. Okay, so there's a delay, but it will not be tardy, and it means it will not be too late. Okay, so what does your translation say at the last clause there, Marjorie?
Come and will not, it will certainly come and will not delay.
Not delay. Okay, so the first use of the word if it makes being delayed after the if, that's the word for delay, but it switches to Hebrew word at the end of the verse, so that should more properly be it will not be too late. Now I think there might be some translations that say it will not be late or too late, okay, in the sense of tardy. Okay, so now I want to move on to the next verse 4 here. Okay, so this is the famous Habakkuk 2:4, of which we hear the last clause of the verse quoted all the time, and hardly ever anyone talks about the first clause of the verse. Okay, but if you remember, the subject is Babylon, okay, and it reads, because she has been heedlessly proud, okay, its soul has not been upright in it, but the righteous one by his faithfulness will live. Okay, so what he's saying is that, yes, Babylon is exalted and proud, and its soul is corrupt. But the righteous one, and we're probably thinking the righteous who are in exile in Babylon, need to live by their faithfulness. Okay, it's ambiguous, by God's faithfulness and by our faithful response. Okay, so there's a parallelism here with Revelation chapter 1, then the verses that we read. Okay, and that he's talking about an appointed time for the vision. Okay, and he's talking about it if it delays, but then it will not come too late. So we have John repeating that it will happen quickly, and it will happen, the appointed time is near, okay? And it will not be too late. So we have that theme in the verse. And then we also have the theme of, those, behold, blessed are those keeping, and how does it put it here? Blessed are the one reading and those listening to the words of the prophecy and keeping the things having been getting written in it. Okay, so this theme is parallel to the last half of Habakkuk 2:4 here, which is, but the righteous one by his faithfulness will live. Okay, so the meaning of listening to and keeping the things written in Revelation has to do with observing God's law and being faithful to Yeshua. Okay, in Revelation the theme is repeated. This is the test. What is it? Those who are, there's a clause that refers to those who are faithful and keep the commandments of God. That's repeated throughout the book. The faithful in Yeshua. Okay, keeping His commandments. All right. So, and there's got another connection here. If we look in, I'll have to find it in my notes, but it's in Habakkuk chapter 2 also. Habakkuk 2:2. Yosef, do you want to read us Habakkuk 2:2?
Yahweh answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it.
Okay, so we have the vision being written down and being written on tablets so that somebody can read it. Okay, so that's parallel here to blessed is the one reading and those who are listening to the words of this prophecy. So God has to communicate to us somehow what He's doing and what He requires of us. Okay, so that we can understand it. So there's a quote in Romans 10 talks about how faithfulness comes. I'm going to flip back there really quick here. So faithfulness comes from listening, and listening by the word of the Anointed One. Okay, so Yeshua is delivering the message here. He's delivering the message in Revelation here. He's correcting assemblies because of their heresies and apostasies at the beginning of the book, and he's urging them to repent. And he's making promises to those who hold faithful. That's the theme of the reading here. Okay, so now I want to get into some more details here. Okay, so we talked about the parallelism. Okay, listening and keeping things. The appointed season is near. Okay, so now let's talk about Babylon proper here. Okay, so the chronology book here has all of this in it. Okay, you can look up the details there. Babylon took over Judea in 605 BC. Okay, halfway through the year, in the fall, in the Babylonian month of Elulu or Tishri. Okay, and Persia took over Babylon halfway through the year 539 BC. Okay, and that would be in October. Okay, so what I want to read here is, actually we need to go back to Jeremiah 25:11 through 14. Can you read that to us, Marjorie?
Jeremiah 14:23.
Chapter 25.
Oh, chapter 25.
Yeah, verse 11 through 14.
This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt, declares the Lord, and will make it desolate forever. I will bring upon that land all the things I have spoken against it, all that is written in this book and prophesied by Jeremiah against all the nations. They themselves will be enslaved by many nations and great kings. I will repay them according to their deeds and the work of their hands.
Okay, so now you can kind of understand the basis of Habakkuk's complaint here. He's expecting Babylon to be judged while God's people are in exile in Judea, or will be in exile to Babylon. I forgot where Habakkuk is on the timeline, but I think it's before the exile actually occurred. But where is Habakkuk on the timeline? Maybe we should answer that question. Do you have any? Maybe it tells us here at the very beginning of the book. Oh, okay. The only hint of a date for this book is the prediction of the Babylonian invasion of Judah in 1/6, but it's unclear how far in the future this event would be. The Babylonians do not appear to be an imminent threat when Habakkuk was writing, but Habakkuk seems to be very aware of the potential threat. Okay. So we really don't know when Habakkuk comes from. We do know that at the time of Hezekiah, when Hezekiah was unwise and showed off the wealth of his treasury to the Babylonian emissaries, that God predicted that they would regret it later on, and that his sons would be exiled into Babylon, some of his sons. Okay, which happened. Okay, so Habakkuk.
Agree with the introduction to Habakkuk here that it was written around 610 to 605.
610 to 605.
That's what it says.
Okay, so then that would be just, I guess that would be when the Babylonians were, in 609, the Babylonians, the Egyptian king, was marching to support the Assyrians in Haran, who were fighting the last gasp of their empire, and Josiah was killed, and the Babylonians actually won and defeated the Assyrians, and the Egyptians had to return to their own country. That was Pharaoh Necho. But the rising Babylonian threat was evident from about 609, 608, and in 605 they took over all of what's called Hatti land in the Babylonian Chronicles, which means Canaan. Okay, and so if Habakkuk wrote just prior to it, then it would be evident the threat, and he seems to have known what the outcome would be, that Judah would be exiled, and that he's writing in advance of the events here. All right. Okay, so in Jeremiah 25, 11 through 14, the prediction is that the nations will serve Babylon for 70 years. Okay, there we go again. Okay, so Babylon was to become an everlasting desolation for 70 years, okay? Or after 70 years, it was to become an everlasting desolation. Now, if you work out the timeline from 605 BC, and that would be in the fall to the fall of 539 BC, that's 66 and a half years. Now, you say if it's from fall to fall, how is it 66 and a half years? Well, the Babylonian year, or the year, is calculated from the spring. So they took it halfway through the year. So there's a part year at the beginning of that counting, the remainder of 605 until the spring of 604, and then you count inclusively whole years, so that's up to 66, and then you have to count a half year at the end, okay? So when I say 66 and a half year, that's 66 years counted whole, only the first one's not whole, and the last one is a half year, which is not whole either. So that's why I say 66 and a half years. All right, so that's short of 70 years. Okay, and then when the Persians conquered Babylon, they didn't destroy the city. They just knocked off the elites and took over, okay, and installed their own princes and their own bureaucracy. And this continued through the entire Persian period until Alexander the Great. I think the walls of Babylon were torn down, and Babylon began to take began to decline and lose its status as a capital city. Although it continued to be an important center until AD 75, after which it disappears it gets lost to time and lost in the sand. So it does become a desolation, but it wasn't right away. Okay, so we still have the question of why do we meet up with Babylon again in the book of Revelation? In Revelation 17 and 18, we meet up with Babylon again. And why do we meet up with 42 months and a time and a half at times, and 1,260-day periods in Revelation? And the reason we do is because there's still 3.5 years for Babylon to dominate all nations. Okay, now, so there's proof of this in the Jeremiah text. Okay, so Valerie, I'd like you to read Jeremiah 25:15 to 26.
Thus Yahweh, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. They shall drink and stagger and be crazed because of the sword that I am sending among them. So I took the cup from Yahweh's hand and made all the nations to whom Yahweh sent me drink it. Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, its kings and officials, to make them a desolation and a waste, a hissing and a curse, as at this day. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, his servants, his officials, all his people, and all the mixed tribes among them. All the kings of the land of Uz, and all the kings of the land of the Philistines, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and the remnant of Ashdod, Edom, Moab, and the sons of Ammon, all the kings of Tyre, all the kings of Sidon, and the kings of the coastland across the sea, Dedan, Tema, Buz, and all who cut the corners of their hair, all the kings of Arabia, and all the kings of the mixed tribes who dwell in the desert, all the kings of Zimri, all the kings of Elam, and all the kings of Media, all the kings of the north, far and near, one after another, and all the kingdoms of the world that are on the face of the earth. And after them the king of Babylon shall drink.
Okay. So as you notice that the passage starts out with the local nations that are going to receive judgment, and it's talking about the judgment of Judah first, then Babylon, and then all of these other nations. Does someone have a question?
Yost was talking to me.
Okay. Is it something I need to consider now?
I have no idea.
Okay.
It's about the people who cut the corners in their hair.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's kind of a side issue right now. It's not the reason we're reading this passage. Okay, so it says at the end of the verse, first of all, it starts with local nations and keeps expanding until it ends up with all the nations of the world and all the kingdoms of earth. Okay, so we know from the book of Revelation that the Antichrist, which will be the king of the restored Babylon, will rule over all the earth. Okay, and all the kingdoms of the earth for 42 months, which is roughly 3.5 years. Okay, we also notice in this passage that the very last words of the passage say that, and after them, the king of Babylon shall drink. Okay, so after the judgment of all of these other nations. So we're getting the sense here that Jeremiah is, if we interpret prophecy in 2020 hindsight, we can see that the Persian takeover of Babylon in 539 BC is not really the end of this prophecy. That's only 66 and a half years. The prophecy actually ends at the, in the even future to us, it will end, okay? All right, so a little side note here in verse 26. Read that again, Valerie, verse 26.
All the kings of the north, far and near, one after another, and all the kingdoms of the world that are on the face of the earth. And after them the king of Babylon shall drink.
Okay, the king of Babylon. So now the Hebrew here says Sheshach. Okay, and Sheshach is a code word for Babylon. Okay, it's only used twice in Scripture. Okay, so how do we know it's a code word? Well, the answer is in Jeremiah 51:41. So you want to look there, Marjorie, and read us Jeremiah 51:41 here.
These are long chapters.
Yeah, it is. It's about Babylon.
How Shishak will be captured, the boast of the whole earth seized. What a horror Babylon will be among the nations.
Okay, so we have parallelism at work here. We have Shishak used in the first clause, and then we have a switch to Babylon in the second.
Mine puts both of them as Babylon. I guess.
Yeah, I know yours does, because the translators figured no one understands Shishak. Okay,
This one says Shishak is a cryptogram for Babylon.
right. That's the prevailing theory of Shishak. Others think it's a region in Babylon, but the important point is that it means Babylon. Okay, looking at my notes here. Okay, so Judea was taken by Babylon in 605 BC and Ululu 1, and the Ululu 1 is equal to the Tishri 1 on the Hebrew calendar. That same year, Nebuchadnezzar's father Nabopolassar died on the 8th of Av, 605, and Darius the Mede took over Babylon in 539. Okay. I'm going to take care of that one. We did that one. We did all of that page. Oh, no, we didn't. There's a few points left on this page here before I make my concluding points here. All right, we did that. Okay, so so the final 3.5 years will commence in the spring. Actually, the 42 months are a little bit longer than the time and a half of time that Israel will be taken over at the time of Jacob's trouble. So the 42 months will begin in the winter, but the time times a half and a time will follow the natural year beginning in the spring. Okay, so the half year will come first, and then followed by 3 years. Okay, and at the end of 3 years, that's when we have the Battle of Armageddon, and when the Antichrist is thrown down. Okay, and the reason we know that is because in Daniel 77s, in the midst of the seven, he will cause a sacrifice and offering to cease. And the midst of it would be in the springtime, okay? As it starts in the fall and it ends in the fall following the sabbatical period cycle, okay? So the Sabbath year of Daniel 9 is linked to this in the future. And Babylon will have been destroyed by the time the Sabbath year ends in the 70th seven or week. and everlasting righteousness will come in as per the prophecy. Everlasting righteousness for God's people and for Judea. Okay, so that is the timing of matters of this vision and the season we're talking about here coming up now. Okay, so I'm going to transition to the immediate season that's coming up, which is the fall feast this year, and we have the Feast of Trumpets coming up. All right, and the Feast of or the Feast of Blowing, Yom Teruah. Okay, and so this is kind of a side point today's lesson. Okay, but finding Yeshua in Revelation. Okay, so we want to discover when Yeshua is talking versus someone else is talking. Okay, and we know that I'll give you a key to this here. Okay, so Yeshua is the messenger. Okay, and John is giving us narration in verses 4 through 12, and then he starts giving us a vision that he saw of Yeshua. Okay, and the key here I want you to see is he heard a voice like a trumpet. Okay, so on the day of Yahweh, or Yahweh's day, I heard behind me a loud voice speaking as a trumpet. Tells him to write. Okay, so this is Yeshua beginning to reveal to him his message for the seven assemblies. Okay, and like Daniel, he fell at his feet as dead, and he laid his right hand on him. And he continues, and then he gives the messages to the seven assemblies. Okay, so that takes us forward to chapter 4. Okay. And at the beginning of chapter 4, would you like to read us that, Valerie? Revelation 4:1.
After this I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this."
Okay, so now if we've read carefully chapter 2 or chapter 1, we'll see that when he talks about the voice of the trumpet, he's referring back to Revelation 1:10, okay, which is clearly Yeshua speaking. Okay, so what he's saying here is that Yeshua continues speaking in chapter 4. Okay, so Yeshua is the one revealing as the messenger,
That's interesting.
as the
The
representative.
voice of Yeshua is like a trumpet.
Yeah.
So the very loud trumpet that everybody heard on Mount Sinai, giving the Ten Commandments, was the voice of Yeshua.
Right. Okay. So, or the voices of God, the voice of Yeshua is the sound just like it, because he's the divine being, one with the Father and with the Holy Spirit. And so John is identifying him through the use of a descriptive term. Okay, which is often the case. Okay, so if we see the descriptive terms in Revelation chapter 1, we see his hairs were white like wool, his eyes were like a fiery flame. Let's see here. Okay, one like the Son of Man. We know from Daniel chapter 7 that that's talking about Yeshua. Okay. So we find there's 4 living creatures speak. Okay, but what Yeshua is doing, he's opening the seals of the scroll. Okay, I saw on the right hand. Okay, the Lamb opens the scroll, and then the living creatures would say what has been written. Okay, so Yeshua's giving the message, but he's got other heavenly beings helping him deliver the message at the same time. Okay, so you've got to kind of sort this out as you're going through Revelation. Okay, so I don't want to go too far down that theme because I still want to stay on the fall feast, the Feast of Trumpets here. Okay, and in that regard, let's read Revelation. This is background here. Let's read Revelation 12, 1 and 2. You want to read that, Marjorie?
great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth.
Okay, so we have some celestial imagery happening here as a metaphor for Miriam giving birth to Yeshua. And the celestial imagery is the Virgin or Virgo being clothed with the sun. So the sun moves through 12 constellations throughout the whole year, and it's in the constellation of Virgo in the fall season. Okay, there's 12 signs to 12 months, which means that the sun will stay in each sign for about 30 days. Okay, and then it says that the moon is under her feet. Okay, so now the moon in its cycle, when it's near a new moon, it's near the sun. Okay, when it's near a full moon, it's opposite the sun. So the moon moves through all 12 constellations in a month. Okay, as it moves along, it probably actually it moves through more than 12 constellations because the sun is moving at the same time too, bringing it towards. But the moon makes a complete cycle, so the moon will cross paths with the sun in the heavens during the dark phase when you can't see the new moon, and then a few days after that, it will be far enough away the sun to make a crescent. So with the sun in the mid body or upper body of the constellation of Virgo, and the moon moving away from it, it will make a new moon. Okay, so the symbolism here is given for the new moon of the 7th month. Okay. Okay, and it's linked up here with the birth of Yeshua, okay, the timing of his birth. Good morning, everyone. I'm adding this to the Sabbath lesson because about 18 minutes of the sound went out at the end of the sermon here, so I'm going to try to complete it. I didn't get to this so soon because we were digesting the very recent news, which I'm sure you all know about. And, well, these are exciting times we live in, and I'm glad that President Trump survived the attempt. Okay, so we were talking about Yom Teruah, and or the Feast of Blowing, and the birth of Yeshua. And I have one last half page of my outline left here, so I'll try to complete the lesson the best I can for you. All right, so we discussed Revelation 12, 1 and 2. Okay, and now I want to look up another recent finding I found, another connection to the rising of the star. As I mentioned, that the planet Sadek, otherwise known as Jupiter in the Roman terminology, went through a heliacal rising on the day of Yeshua's birth, September 1, 2 BC. Okay, so I got several relevant texts on that, and the first one I want to discuss is a recent one I found. This one has actually escaped my notice. It's in Revelation 7 and verse 2 here, so I'll read it to you. So there's let's see, turn this around here. There's a Good News Messiah on the hood of my son's truck just before he's going to go to work. So we're going to read Revelation 7:2. Okay, and that says, let's see here, I'll turn the page over. Then I saw another messenger ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living Almighty. And he cried out with a loud voice to the 4 messengers, to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea. He will not have harmed the earth or the sea or the trees until we may have sealed the servants of our Almighty on their foreheads. Okay, so there are several other passages I can think of now that you can be familiar with One is, I think, Ezekiel chapter 10, 9 and 10, concerning matters like this. Maybe chapter 11, but we won't look that up right now. The words I want to focus on are, I've capitalized messenger here, ascending from the rising of the sun. Okay, so rising of the sun, of course, is at the dawn, okay? And then if we just substitute the, for messenger here, the branch or the star rising from the ascending of the sun. So I told you that Anatole can mean a riser or an tense of a shoot or a branch, which is one of the messianic titles. And also the star that comes out of Jacob is another messianic title. So we have both of them. And the messenger rising from the sun would fit astronomically with the heliacal rising of Jupiter, which happens at 12 degrees, or the planet Tzedek, okay, which means just or righteous. Okay, so that's another cryptic astronomical key or synchronism here in the text. Okay, and just to remind you, in Revelation 22:16, which I've discussed several times before, flip over there, last chapter of Revelation, it says, Yeshua, I, Yeshua, have sent my messenger to testify to you these things for the assemblies. I am the root and kindred of David, the bright dawn star. Okay. And then in another passage, Revelation 2, I think he says, I will give you the morning star. So these synchronisms line up with the astronomical events given in Revelation 12:1 and 2. Okay, and with the symbology and everything. Okay, so this is how Revelation's communicating through symbolism, but it's also giving us concrete information if we know where to look in the chronology. All right, so the Feast of Trumpets is coming up this fall. Okay, this is we're in month 5 right now. Okay, and this is I think we looked up 7th or 8th day of month 5. 6, 7, 8, maybe 8. So this is the second day of the week right now. Okay, and remind you also something else I said that got cut off was that last week's web lesson was on eschatology of the kingdom. Okay, and so we keep these in mind when we enter into the fall feast, the eschatology of the kingdom. And we have to hold the camera steady so it focuses. Okay, so when Yeshua came, the kingdom was going to the nations, okay, 2,000 years. And then we have a phase when he restores the fortunes of Israel and returns the exiles, as all who have been faithful in Yeshua, okay, who keep his laws, along with faithful Jews, to the land of Israel, okay, and restores the shepherds, and I'm meaning the teachers and the preachers and the spiritual leadership of the nations. They no longer lead the people astray. And I foresee that period being at least 100 years chronologically. And then this is followed by the time of Jacob's testing, what we call the tribulation period, I guess, and which is followed by the millennial kingdom. All right. So thank you for listening. That wraps up the end of the Sabbath lesson here. Dan Gregg, over and out.